The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under the door of the trailer, while Harper Winters stood at the bathroom sink, trying to coax hot water from pipes that had given up, pretending to care about her problems. 14 days. The words stamped across the top of the page in red ink, as if the black type below wasn't clear enough. $4,680 in arrears. Vacate premises by 5 p.m. March 18th, or law enforcement will assist in removal. She read it twice, standing in the narrow hallway that connected the trailer's 2 bedrooms to its combination kitchen and living space. Through the thin walls came the sound of Willa coughing, that wet rattle that had kept them both awake the past 3 nights. Strep throat, the urgent care doctor had said, scribbling a prescription Harper had folded into her pocket without filling. $92 for antibiotics, another $140 for the visit, even with the sliding scale. She'd chosen the visit. The coughing continued. Harper folded the notice and tucked it into the drawer beneath the microwave where she kept the other warnings. Utility shutoff scheduled for Friday, unless $212 reached the electric company by end of business Thursday. Final notice on the water bill, $68. The phone had already gone silent 2 weeks ago, but she still carried it, charged it at work when she remembered, pretended it might ring with good news. The bathroom door opened and Garrett emerged, 9 years old and already carrying the weight of being the oldest by 4 minutes. His brother Colton followed, mirror image except for the cowlick that refused to lie flat, no matter how Harper tried. They moved to the kitchen table without speaking, accustomed to mornings that offered little beyond silence and whatever remained in the cupboard. Today that meant the last heel of bread, divided 4 ways, and tap water in plastic cups from a gas station Harper no longer worked at. Willa joined them, pale and subdued. Reed took the 4th chair, notebook already open, pencil moving across the page. 8 years old, and he treated every morning like an assignment that required documentation. Harper watched them eat without appetite, their small hands careful not to take more than their share of nothing. The clock above the sink read 6:42. Her shift at Rosie's Roadhouse started at 3, 38 miles away in Chester, which meant leaving by 2:15 to account for the explorer's reluctance to exceed 45 miles per hour without coughing worse than Willa. Before that, she promised Luther she'd stop by the general store to discuss the food pantry hours. Before that, she needed to figure out how to tell 4 children they'd be homeless in 2 weeks. But first the mail. She pulled on yesterday's jeans and a sweatshirt that had belonged to someone else before the thrift store and before Harper. The morning air bit through the fabric as she crossed the gravel lot to the cluster of dented metal boxes that served the trailer park's 23 units. Most of them empty now, doors hanging open, uncollected mail spilling onto the ground below. Economic recovery, the politicians called it. Harper called it something else. Her box held 2 items, a credit card offer promising approval for everyone, especially those with challenged credit histories, at only 32% APR, and a cream-colored envelope, heavy stock, with a return address in Millbrook, Montana, the law offices of Mitchell and Associates. She turned it over twice before opening it. The letter inside consisted of 3 paragraphs in serif typeface, each word chosen for maximum efficiency and minimum compassion. Your grandfather, Nathaniel Blackwell, deceased February 18th. Estate settlement requires your presence. Attend will reading March 5th at 10 a.m. or forfeit inheritance rights. Please confirm attendance by return mail or telephone. Harper stood in the Montana cold, which felt different from the cold she'd left behind in Wyoming when she'd moved the kids to this trailer 6 months ago, chasing a job that had evaporated after 3 weeks. Her grandfather. She'd met him twice, once at age 7 when her mother Vivian had driven to Montana for reasons Harper couldn't remember, and again at 12, a shorter visit, tense and uncomfortable, ending with Vivian crying all the way back to Denver. Nate Blackwell had lived alone in the wilderness for 46 years, according to family legend, which was sparse and contradictory. Hermit, recluse, paranoid, brilliant, Crazy. The stories shifted depending on who told them and how much they'd had to drink. Harper's mother refused to discuss him after the second visit, and when Vivian had remarried and moved on, Nate Blackwell became a name that appeared on Christmas cards Harper's stepfather threw away without opening. She walked back to the trailer, the letter clutched in one hand. 14 days until eviction, 7 days until the will reading, 537 miles between her current disaster and whatever waited in Millbrook. The Explorer's tank held maybe a quarter, enough for 50 miles if she coasted downhill and prayed to gods she'd stopped believing in 3 jobs ago. Inside, the kids had migrated to the couch, Garrett and Colton playing some invented game with bottle caps, while Willa leaned against the armrest trying not to cough. Reed remained at the table, his notebook covered in careful drawings of birds that didn't exist. Harper's voice came out steadier than she expected. "I need to tell you something." 4 faces turned toward her, Willa's eyes too bright, fever she couldn't afford to treat. Garrett's expression already bracing for bad news, because bad news was the only kind they received anymore. Colton's forced optimism trying to hold the world together with 9-year-old determination. Reed's analytical gaze, cataloging this moment like everything else, filing it away in whatever system he used to make sense of their lives. She told them about the letter, about the grandfather they'd never met, about Montana and the will reading, and the possibility that maybe, somewhere in the wreckage of their circumstances, something might change. She didn't mention the eviction notice. They didn't need both weights today. Garrett's question cut straight through. What if it's nothing? What if we go all that way and he left nothing? Then we'll have tried. Colton brightened immediately. It's like a treasure hunt. Maybe Grandpa left something amazing. Reed closed his notebook. Statistically, unexpected inheritances from estranged relatives rarely amount to significant wealth. Most likely scenario is nominal assets, possibly even debt transfer. Thank you, Reed. That's very helpful. Willa coughed into her elbow, the sound rattling. When she spoke, her voice came out hoarse. Will there be a house? I'd like a real house, just once. Harper's chest constricted. She knelt in front of the couch, eye level with her daughter's flushed face. I don't know what's there, baby, but we'll find out together, all of us. The decision made itself. She had nothing to lose because nothing was exactly what they had. Mitchell and Associates, please confirm attendance. She'd confirm it by showing up, because the 47 cents in her checking account wouldn't cover a phone call and stamps, required money she'd already allocated to the gas that would get them to Montana. They left on Sunday morning. Harper packed everything that mattered, which fit easily into 4 garbage bags in 2 cardboard boxes. Clothes mostly, a few books the kids couldn't bear to abandon, Reed's notebook spanning 3 years of observations. The security deposit was long gone, and the trailer's owner had made clear no forwarding address would help. She loaded the Explorer while the kids waited inside, then drove to the front office and left the keys in the drop box without a note. The route took them through Wyoming wilderness, through towns that had given up pretending and others still trying. Harper had mapped it the night before on Luther's computer, memorizing the turns because printing cost money and her phone's GPS required data she couldn't afford. 537 miles, 9 hours if everything went perfectly, 12 hours accounting for reality. They made it in 14. The Explorer's transmission started slipping outside of Sheridan, the grinding noise accompanied by a smell that suggested expensive repairs Harper would never be able to afford. They stopped 3 times so Willa could be sick on the shoulder, her fever climbing despite the children's ibuprofen Harper had shoplifted from a gas station bathroom, while the clerk argued with someone about lottery tickets. Colton navigated with a road atlas from 2003 they'd found in the trailer's junk drawer, his finger tracing highways while Garrett called out mile markers. Darkness fell somewhere in Montana's emptiness. Harper had planned to reach Millbrook by evening, find somewhere cheap to sleep, arrive at the lawyer's office looking marginally presentable. Instead, they pulled into town at 10:43, Every business closed, streetlights few and far between. She drove until she found the address from the letter, a brick building on what passed for Main Street, then parked across the street and told the kids to sleep. She didn't. The Explorer's heater worked intermittently, and between Willa's coughing and her own thoughts circling like vultures, rest seemed like a luxury meant for people whose lives contained hope. She watched the empty street and tried to remember her grandfather's face. Stern, maybe, weathered, eyes that looked past you to something else. Or maybe that was just how she'd interpreted his expression at 12, already learning that adults disappointed you in proportion to how much you needed them. Dawn came gray and cold. Harper used wet wipes from the glove compartment to clean the kids' faces and her own. Garrett and Colton wore their least damaged jeans and shirts that almost matched. Willa had a dress from someone's hand-me-downs, pink and too large, but it was the nicest thing she owned. Reed wore what he always wore, dark pants and a button-up shirt he'd insisted on buying at Goodwill with his birthday money, claiming every scientist needed professional attire. At 9:53, they crossed the street and entered the building. The directory in the lobby listed Mitchell and Associates on the second floor. They climbed stairs that echoed, following signs down a hallway that smelled of old carpet and older wood, until they reached a frosted glass door with gold lettering. The reception area held 4 chairs and a desk, where a woman in her 60s glanced up from a computer screen. Her expression shifted through several variations of surprise before settling on professional courtesy. "You must be Miss Winters. And family. Mr. Mitchell is expecting you. The other beneficiary is already here." She led them through a door into an office that tried too hard to suggest success. Heavy desk, leather chairs that had seen better decades, diplomas on walls alongside photographs of trout and elk. Behind the desk sat a man in his 70s, Douglas Mitchell according to the nameplate, spectacles sliding down his nose as he gestured to the chairs. Already seated was Preston Winters, Harper's first cousin, 15 years older, wearing a suit that cost more than Harper had earned in the past 3 months. He stood when they entered, his expression cycling through recognition, surprise, and something that might have been pity before landing on smug satisfaction. "Harper, it's been, what, 5 years? 6? His handshake was perfunctory. "These your kids? My goodness, 4 of them. You've been busy." She introduced them by name, watching Preston's face as he calculated the cost of raising 4 children alone. His pity deepened. He returned to his chair, the leather creaking under his weight in a way that suggested quality and permanence, things Harper had forgotten existed. Mitchell cleared his throat and began reading from documents that reduced a human life to assets and debts, divisions and transfers. Last will and testament of Nathaniel Blackwell, deceased February 18th, 2025, resident of Millbrook, Montana, being of sound mind and body. The language went on, legal phrases that meant nothing until they meant everything. To Preston Winters, he left the house in town, 2-story Victorian, well-maintained, currently valued at approximately $235,000, according to county assessment. Also $78,000 in savings bonds and cash accounts. Also a 2020 Chevrolet Silverado with 14,000 miles. Preston nodded as if he'd expected exactly this. His face carried the expression of someone whose virtue had been confirmed by inheritance, proof that his success stemmed from deserving it rather than merely having it. To Harper Winters, he left the Blackwell Barn property, 40 acres 12 miles outside Millbrook, accessed by unmaintained road. Structure built 1978 to 1980, presently in severe disrepair. Condemned twice by county inspection, most recently 2019. Estimated salvage value negligible. Also associated tax lien, currently $15,000 in arrears, payment due within 90 days of transfer, or property subject to county seizure. Mitchell removed his spectacles and began to explain the complications, but Harper had stopped listening after $15,000. She'd inherited debt, not just debt, Impossible debt attached to a property everyone agreed was worthless. 90 days to pay money she'd need 90 years to accumulate if she could find work, which she couldn't, as evidenced by every failed application, every door closed politely in her face. Preston's laugh came out sharp, echoing in the small office. The old barn. Harper, I have to be honest with you. That place is a liability, not an asset. The county's been trying to get someone to demolish it for years. It's genuinely dangerous. 3 winters ago, part of the roof collapsed. Last summer, kids broke in and nearly died when the loft floor gave way. You basically inherited a tax bill attached to a structure that needs to be bulldozed. Mitchell nodded slowly. The property has been subject to significant deterioration. County records show multiple violations. The structure would require extensive repairs to meet safety standards, estimated in the $40,000 to $50,000 range. Given the tax lien and repair costs, the practical value is negative. Preston leaned forward, his expression shifting to what he probably thought was kindness. Look, Harper, I can see you're in a tough spot. Tell you what, sign the property over to me. I'll absorb the tax lien, handle the demolition, or whatever the county requires. That way you're not stuck with debt you can't pay. Consider it family helping family. He smiled, and Harper saw in that smile every time someone had offered to help her, right out of what little she had. Every landlord who'd suggested flexible arrangements if she was flexible. Every boss who'd paid her less because she needed the work too badly to negotiate. Every system designed to grind down people who started with nothing until they had less than that. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. No, thank you, Preston. I'll handle my own inheritance. His smile froze, then shifted to something harder. Your funeral. Don't come crying to me when the county seizes it and you're still on the hook for legal fees. I'm trying to do you a favor here. I appreciate the concern. I'll manage. Mitchell continued through the remaining details, documents that required signatures, transfer paperwork that would take weeks to process. Preston signed his portion with a fountain pen he'd brought for the occasion, each stroke deliberate and self-satisfied. Harper used a ballpoint from Mitchell's desk, the kind that barely worked, ink skipping across the page. Outside on the sidewalk, Preston caught up with them before they reached the Explorer. Harper, seriously, you need to think about those kids. That property is worthless, and the debt is real. You're being stubborn, and it's going to hurt them. She turned to face him, and for a moment saw him clearly. Expensive suit, expensive car parked 3 spaces down, expensive certainty that his comfort proved his worth. He'd never struggled, never chosen between medicine and food, never counted coins to determine if the gas would last until payday. He'd inherited a house worth $250,000 and viewed it as confirmation of his value rather than luck. Thank you for your concern, Preston. We'll be fine. He shook his head, climbed into his Mercedes, and drove away, leaving behind exhaust and the faint impression that Harper had made a terrible mistake. The kids piled into the Explorer without asking questions, though Reed opened his notebook and began writing furiously. Harper sat behind the wheel, hands shaking now that the performance was over. She just committed to a debt she couldn't pay for property everyone agreed was worthless. In 90 days, the county would seize it anyway, and she'd still owe legal fees, collection charges, whatever else they invented to extract money from people who had none. But something had stopped her from signing it over to Preston, some instinct she couldn't name or explain. Her grandfather had lived on that property for 46 years. He left it to her specifically, not to Preston, not to anyone else. There had to be a reason. Garrett's voice came from the back seat. Mom, where is it? The barn? She pulled the papers Mitchell had given her from the envelope. Property description, GPS coordinates, hand-drawn map that looked like it predated modern surveying. 12 miles northwest of Millbrook, off County Road 47, private drive approximately 6 miles from paved road. Last known access 2019 via 4-wheel drive vehicle only. I think we need to see it. They drove through Millbrook, which consisted of maybe 3,000 people, spread across a valley surrounded by mountains that touched the sky. Main Street held the essential businesses: diner, grocery store, hardware shop, feed supply, gas station, and a bar with neon signs advertising beer brands Harper associated with her stepfather's disappearances. At the far edge of town, County Road 47 began its journey into wilderness. The pavement lasted 11 miles. The Explorer handled it reluctantly, transmission grinding on the inclines, but it held together. Then the pavement ended, and the road became two parallel tracks through tall grass, ruts deep enough to scrape the undercarriage, branches reaching from either side to scratch warnings across the paint. They drove slowly, Harper gripping the wheel, Garrett and Colton pressed against the windows, watching for bears or wolves or whatever they imagined Montana wilderness contained. Willa had fallen asleep against Colton's shoulder, fever warm. Reed continued writing, occasionally looking up to note landmarks that existed only in his systematic mind. 6 miles in, the road climbed a small rise. At the crest, the barn came into view. Harper's foot found the brake, and the Explorer rolled to a stop, settling into the ruts with a sigh that suggested it had no interest in going further. For a long moment, none of them spoke, just stared through the windshield at what her grandfather had left her. Massive didn't capture it adequately. The structure stretched 68 feet from end to end, 45 feet across, with a peaked roof that reached toward the sky like the hull of a capsized ship. The wood had weathered to silver gray, burnished by decades of Montana sun and wind and snow. Several boards hung loose or were missing entirely, creating gaps that revealed darkness within. The roof sagged dramatically in the center, dropping what looked like a full foot, as if the building was slowly folding in on itself. The entire western wall leaned noticeably to the left, tilted at an angle that made Harper's stomach clench. But the foundation was granite fieldstone, 3 feet high, running the entire perimeter, and from where Harper sat, it looked perfect. Not a crack visible, not a stone out of place, solid and level, while everything above it fell apart. The kids tumbled out before she could stop them, running through the waist-high grass toward the barn, their voices bright with excitement that poverty hadn't yet extinguished. Harper followed more slowly, pulling her jacket tight against wind that carried the scent of pine and old wood, and something else she couldn't identify. She was circling the structure, trying to assess the damage and finding new problems with every step, when the sound of an engine made her turn. An old Ford pickup, rust and primer and determination, pulled up beside the Explorer. The man who climbed out wore overalls and a flannel shirt, weathered face suggesting 70-plus years spent outdoors. He approached with the cautious friendliness of someone who'd lived in small towns his whole life, where strangers were noted and newcomers remained strangers for decades. "You must be Nate's granddaughter. I'm Luther Briggs. Run the general store about 2 miles back toward town. Saw your vehicle and figured I'd come make sure you found the place all right." Harper shook his extended hand, surprised by the genuine warmth. "Harper Winters, thank you for checking on us. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm looking at here." Luther's expression shifted to something that might have been sympathy or might have been concern. "Mind if I speak plainly? You seem like someone who needs the truth rather than comfort." "Please." He walked her around the perimeter, pointing out problems with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen structures fail. The foundation, he confirmed, was sound. Granite from a local quarry, probably installed in the 1920s when this was part of a larger ranch. But the barn Nate had built atop it was another story entirely. The support posts had rotted where they met the ground, moisture wicking up into the wood despite Nate's best efforts. The roof structure needed complete replacement, not repair. The center beam had cracked and would eventually fail, probably in the next heavy snow. The west wall had shifted because the ground beneath it had settled, and straightening it would require jacking up that entire side, reinforcing the foundation underneath, and essentially rebuilding from the ground up. Professional repairs, Luther estimated, would run $45,000 to $50,000 minimum. If Harper did some of the work herself, maybe she could get it down to $22,000, assuming she had the skills and the time and the tools and the materials. She didn't have any of those things. She had $51.23 in the bank and an eviction notice from a trailer she'd already abandoned. She had 4 kids who needed stability and medicine and food. She had 90 days before the county seized the property for unpaid taxes, and 3 months after that before collection agencies started calling about debt she'd inherited from a grandfather who'd apparently spent 46 years protecting worthless land for reasons no one could explain. Luther seemed to read her thoughts. "I need to tell you something about your grandfather, about this property." They walked away from the barn, far enough that the kids couldn't overhear. Luther's voice dropped to the confidential tone reserved for information that changed how you understood things. "Nate bought this land in 1978, paid $13,500 for 40 acres of wilderness with an old barn foundation and nothing else. That was every penny he had, cleaned out his savings, liquidated everything. Then he spent the next 18 months building that barn himself, alone. Wouldn't accept help from anyone, wouldn't explain why he was doing it. People thought he'd lost his mind." Harper watched the kids exploring, Garrett and Colton venturing close to the barn's entrance, while Willa sat in the grass drawing patterns with her finger. Reed had wandered to the foundation, his attention caught by something there. Luther continued, "He lived here 46 years, Harper, completely alone. Wouldn't let anyone visit except me, and that's only because I brought supplies once a month and didn't ask questions. The town decided he was paranoid, called him crazy behind his back. But I saw his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a crazy man. They were the eyes of someone carrying a burden too heavy to share." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because of what happened every few years, regular as clockwork. Apex Resource Development, that's a big mining company, corporate headquarters in Billings. They tried to buy this land 9 times over 40 years. Started in 1982, kept coming back. Each time the offer got bigger. Last one was 7 months before Nate died. $210,000 for 40 acres of land the county assesses at $32,000. For property with no utilities, no road access, no obvious value." Harper's attention sharpened. "What did my grandfather say?" "Refused every time, didn't even consider it. And after that last offer, their attorney, a man named Warren Holloway, told Nate something I happened to overhear. Said, 'Time is on our side, Mr. Blackwell. We'll acquire this property eventually, one way or another.' And 2 weeks later, Nate had the heart attack that killed him. Doctors said it was stress, genetics, age. Probably was. But Harper, your grandfather, wasn't paranoid. He was protecting something. People in this town are afraid of this property. They won't say why, but the fear is real. You need to understand what you've gotten yourself into." Reed's voice cut through, high and excited. Mom, come look at this. Someone carved pictures in the rocks." They found him kneeling at the northeast corner of the foundation, his fingers tracing patterns in the granite. Harper knelt beside him and felt her breath catch. Someone had carved symbols into the stone, not scratched or etched, but carved deeply, precisely, with tools and time and clear intention. Geometric patterns, circles within circles, lines that branched like lightning or tree roots or dendritic crystals. Strange, angular marks that might have been letters from an alphabet she didn't recognize. The symbols weren't random graffiti. They ran in a continuous band around the entire foundation, each one connected to the next in a pattern that spiraled inward as it progressed. At the northeast corner where Reed knelt, the spiral tightened, the symbols becoming more complex, more detailed. Luther leaned in close, then stood and walked the perimeter slowly. 46 years I've passed this barn. Must have driven by it 200 times, stopped here dozens. Never noticed these before. Willa appeared beside them, her artist's eye immediately drawn to the patterns. She traced them with one finger, following the spiral. They repeat every 6 symbols, see? Circle, branch, angle, curve, branch, circle. Then it starts again, but different. Garrett and Colton had ventured inside the barn through the main entrance, massive doors hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Their voices echoed from within the cavernous space, calling back and forth as they explored. Harper wanted to call them out, warn them about the rotted floors and collapsing roof, but she was transfixed by the symbols, by the precision and care that had gone into carving them. Reed opened his notebook and began copying the patterns with meticulous accuracy. His voice carried that analytical tone he used when his mind was processing information faster than he could articulate. These aren't decorative, they're systematic, intentional, like a code or a map. Colton's shout made them all jump. "Mom, you have to see inside. There's stuff up on the beams, way high up." Harper left Reed with the symbols and entered the barn. The interior stole her breath for different reasons than the exterior. The space was vast, 68 by 45 translated to thousands of square feet under a ceiling that peaked at 28 feet. Shafts of dusty sunlight cut through gaps in the walls and roof, illuminating the emptiness. A loft ran along 2 sides, maybe 14 feet deep, its floorboards visibly rotted and dangerous. The main support beams were hand-hewn timber, 12 by 12, ancient wood that had held this structure together for decades. And carved into those beams, 24 feet above the floor, were more symbols. These were larger, more elaborate, forming what looked almost like a map or a diagram that ran the length of the main crossbeam. Garrett pointed upward. "See? They're the same as the ones outside, but bigger, and there's more of them." Harper's nursing training kicked in automatically, assessing risks. The loft floor would collapse if anyone tried to climb it. The ladder leading up looked like it would disintegrate under weight. But the main floor seemed solid enough, and the kids were staying well away from the walls. Colton had found something in the corner, half buried under collapsed hay bales. "What's this?" A toolbox, rusted red Craftsman logo barely visible. Inside, wrapped in what had once been oilcloth but was now mostly decomposed fabric, lay a journal. Harper lifted it carefully, aware she was holding something that had survived decades. Leather cover, water-stained and warped. Many pages stuck together or illegible, but the cover was clear enough. Western Geological Survey, Field Notes, N. Blackwell, 1978. Garrett opened it to a page that had survived relatively intact. The handwriting was precise, engineer's block letters, all caps for headers and labels. The date read March 18th, 1978, Survey Site 7, Initial Assessment. Below that, technical notes about rock formations and mineral samples, sketches of geological cross-sections, coordinates that meant nothing to Harper. And scattered throughout the visible pages, the same symbols from the foundation and beams. Sometimes alone, sometimes in groups, always accompanied by notations Harper couldn't decipher. They carried the journal outside into better light. Luther examined it while Harper tried to process what they'd found. Her grandfather had been a geologist. He'd conducted surveys in 1978. He'd bought this land immediately after and built this barn by himself, carving symbols into the foundation and beams that matched his professional field notes. Colton flipped pages carefully until he found an entry that was mostly legible. His voice carried across the clearing as he read aloud. August 14th, 1978. Assay data confirms unprecedented concentrations. WH demands falsified submission. I refuse. What lies beneath this ground is worth more than money. It's worth the future. He threatens Adelaide and baby Vivian. I must choose. Harper felt the words land like physical blows. Adelaide had been her grandmother's name. Vivian was her mother. Baby Vivian meant 1978, which meant her mother had been an infant when her grandfather had faced some kind of threat. Luther's expression had gone carefully blank. "Harper, I think we need to get the kids out of the sun. Willa's looking feverish. Why don't you take them back to town, get them settled? I'll come by tomorrow and we can talk more." She wanted to argue, to demand explanations, to understand why her grandfather had spent 46 years protecting land everyone claimed was worthless. But Willa's face was flushed, her eyes too bright, and Harper's most immediate problem wasn't solving mysteries from 1978. It was finding somewhere to sleep and something to feed 4 children who'd eaten nothing but gas station snacks in the past 12 hours. They loaded back into the Explorer, Harper carrying the journal like it might contain answers. Luther gave directions to the Millbrook Motor Lodge, a place that offered weekly rates if you didn't ask too many questions. Harper didn't mention she couldn't afford daily rates, let alone weekly. The motel consisted of 12 units arranged in an L shape around a parking lot that had given up on asphalt and reverted to gravel. The office smelled of cigarettes and resignation. The clerk, a woman in her 50s, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much and cared too little, quoted $70 per night, $90 for a unit with 2 beds instead of 1. Harper counted the cash she'd withdrawn from her account that morning. $51. She explained she'd just inherited property nearby, would have money soon. Could she possibly pay what she had now and the rest tomorrow? The clerk's expression didn't change. "Cash up front, no exceptions. If you can't pay, there's a shelter in Great Falls, about 90 miles north." Back in the Explorer, Harper sat with her hands on the wheel while the kids waited silently. She could drive to Great Falls. The gas might last if she coasted downhill and didn't use the heater. The shelter would take them in, probably, if they had space, which they might not, and if they did, she'd need to explain why she was homeless, and someone would eventually involve social services. And then she'd spend the next 6 months proving she was fit to keep her children while sleeping in a vehicle that barely ran. Or she could drive back to the barn. The decision made itself again. She turned the Explorer around and headed out County Road 47, following the ruts she'd memorized that morning. Sunset came early in the mountains, shadows stretching across the valley as they climbed the rise, and the barn came back into view, looking even more ominous in the fading light. They'd camped before, back when Harper had believed camping was an adventure rather than a necessity. She'd kept the sleeping bags from better times, and they unrolled them on the barn's main floor in the least damaged corner where the roof looked relatively sound. The temperature dropped fast once the sun disappeared, and the barn offered no heat beyond what their bodies generated. Harper pulled food from the box she'd packed: peanut butter crackers, granola bars past their expiration date, a jar of applesauce they passed around taking turns with a single spoon. Not enough, never enough, but something. She gave Willa 2 more ibuprofen and held her while she coughed, feeling the fever burn through the sleeping bag. Garrett produced the journal from his backpack. "Can we read more? Like a story?" They huddled around Harper's phone flashlight, battery at 63%, and she opened the journal to pages that had survived intact. The technical language meant little. References to core samples and assay procedures, mineral concentrations measured in parts per million, geological strata that dated back millions of years. But interspersed with the science were personal observations that revealed the man her grandfather had been. April 2nd, 1978. The valley floor shows promising signs, beautiful country. Hard to imagine it torn apart by machinery. May 15th, 1978. Concerns about environmental impact growing. The company sees only profit potential. I see ecosystem destruction. June 8th, 1978. WH insists we accelerate timeline. I've requested more thorough analysis. Request denied. July 22nd, 1978. Sample 34 shows extraordinary results. If these concentrations hold across the site, We found something significant, perhaps too significant. August 12th, 1978. Today I understood what greed does to decent men. WH showed his true nature. I see now why this valley has remained pristine. Not because it lacks value, but because exposing that value would destroy it. And then 2 pages later, the entry Colton had read earlier. August 14th, 1978. The threat against Adelaide and baby Vivian, the choice her grandfather had faced. Reed's voice cut through the darkness, matter of fact. He found something valuable and someone threatened him to keep it secret. So he falsified his reports and bought the land to protect it. Harper pulled the sleeping bag tighter around them. That's what it sounds like. Then why did he die poor? Why live out here alone for 46 years? If it's valuable, why not sell it and use the money? She had no answer. The journal didn't either, at least not in the pages that remained legible. Whatever her grandfather had found, whatever reason had driven him to spend nearly half a century guarding this land, he'd taken most of the explanation with him. They fell asleep eventually, 4 children and 1 exhausted mother on a barn floor in Montana wilderness. Their only comfort the knowledge that they were together, and tomorrow might somehow be less impossible than today. Harper woke to darkness and the sound of Willa's breathing, ragged and wet. She fumbled for her phone. 3:17 a.m., battery at 41%. The fever had climbed despite the medicine. Willa's forehead burned against Harper's palm. Strep could turn to scarlet fever, to rheumatic fever, to complications that required hospitalization Harper couldn't afford. She needed antibiotics. They needed proper shelter. They needed everything Harper couldn't provide. She held her daughter and stared up into the barn's darkness, at the symbols carved into beams she could no longer see, and wondered what her grandfather would tell her if he were here. Would he say she'd made the right choice, refusing Preston's offer? Or would he look at his great-grandchildren shivering in a collapsing barn and say she'd been a fool to mistake stubbornness for courage? The answer would have to wait for morning. Everything would have to wait for morning. She pulled the sleeping bag tighter and listened to her children breathe, and counted the days until the county seized the property and she'd have nothing at all. Dawn came reluctant and cold through the gaps in the barn walls. Harper woke to find Colton already awake, sitting near the entrance with the journal open across his knees. The early light caught the dust motes dancing through broken boards, turning the air golden despite the temperature. Her phone showed 6:42 and 23% battery. She'd need to find somewhere to charge it soon. Add that to the list of impossible needs. Willa stirred against her side, the fever broken or at least diminished. Small mercies counted for something. Harper extracted herself from the sleeping bag without waking the others and joined Colton near the entrance where the light was better. His finger traced symbols in the journal's margins. They're not random. See how they connect? Each one flows into the next. It's like reading directions. Harper studied the pages over his shoulder. Technical notations about mineral deposits and geological formations mixed with the recurring symbols. References to something called rare earth elements appeared frequently. Concentrations measured in parts per million. Comparisons to other sites that meant nothing without context. But Colton was right about the symbols. They formed patterns, sequences that repeated with variations. Garrett emerged from his sleeping bag and joined them. Are we going to live here? The question hung in the cold air. Harper hadn't let herself consider it directly, but the reality pressed down regardless. They had nowhere else. The motel wanted cash she didn't have. Going back to Wyoming meant what? Another trailer park, another job that would vanish, another cycle of barely surviving until they stopped surviving at all. For now, until we figure out what comes next. Preston said the place was condemned. That means it's not safe, right? It means the county thinks it needs repairs. We'll be careful. Willa woke coughing, the sound harsh in the cavernous space. Reed followed, immediately reaching for his notebook as if sleep had been an interruption to more important work. They ate the remaining granola bars and finished the applesauce, portions too small to satisfy, but enough to quiet the immediate demands of hunger. Harper's phone rang, the sound startling in the quiet. Unknown number, Montana area code. She answered expecting collection agencies or worse. Luther's voice came through. Morning. Wondered if you folks needed anything. I'm heading into town for supplies. Could swing by the barn if you've got a list. Relief flooded through her. We're okay. Thank you for asking. Harper, you spent the night out there, didn't you? In the barn? She didn't answer immediately. Admitting it felt like confessing failure. No judgment, just concerned. That structure isn't safe for sleeping, especially with kids. Tell you what, I've got a spare room over the store. Nothing fancy, but it's warm and the roof doesn't leak. You're welcome to it while you sort things out. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. Nate was my friend. Only friend, really, last 20 years. Figure I owe it to him to make sure his family doesn't freeze to death in his barn. Pride warred with necessity. Necessity won because her children's well-being mattered more than her dignity. That's very generous. We accept. Good. I'll be there in an hour. She used the remaining battery to search rare earth elements on what little data her phone still held from the library's Wi-Fi 2 states ago. The results loaded slowly, fragmentary information about 17 chemical elements critical to modern technology. Smartphones, computers, electric vehicles, wind turbines, military applications, all dependent on these materials with names like neodymium and dysprosium that sounded like science fiction. The articles mentioned China's dominance of production, America's dependence on imports, strategic importance for national security. The connection to her grandfather's journal seemed obvious. He'd found these elements here, on this land, in concentrations that had made him write words like unprecedented and extraordinary. Someone identified only as WH had demanded falsified reports. Threats had been made against Harper's grandmother and infant mother. Her grandfather had chosen to bury the discovery rather than let it enrich whoever WH was. But that had been 1978, 47 years ago. If the deposit was valuable then, what would it be worth now? And why had Apex Resource Development offered $210,000 7 months before Nate died? Luther arrived in his pickup, ancient Ford that ran on determination and regular maintenance. He helped them load their few belongings, his face carefully neutral about how little they owned. The drive back to town took 20 minutes, following the ruts until pavement returned and civilization resumed. Briggs General Store occupied a corner lot on Millbrooks Main Street, two-story wood-frame building that had probably started life as something else before becoming whatever the town needed. The store occupied the ground floor, aisles of canned goods and hardware, and everything people 12 miles from anywhere might require. Stairs behind the counter led up to 3 rooms that Luther had converted from storage into living space years ago when his wife left and he decided the commute from their house wasn't worth maintaining the fiction of normal life. The room he offered had 2 beds, a bathroom down the hall they'd share with Luther, and a window overlooking the street. Luxury by Harper's recent standards. The kids claimed beds and territory, while Harper stood in the doorway, trying to find words for gratitude that didn't sound like the desperation it was. Luther waved off her attempts. Get settled. There's a bathroom with a shower that works most days. I've got to mind the store, but make yourselves at home. She ran the shower until the water turned hot, steam filling the small bathroom. Willow went first, Harper monitoring her fever and checking for the rash that would indicate scarlet fever. The antibiotics still waited in a pharmacy somewhere, $92 Harper didn't have. But the fever had broken, and Willa's energy seemed better. Maybe her immune system would handle it without pharmaceutical intervention. Maybe they'd get lucky for once. After everyone had showered and dressed in clean clothes from the garbage bags, Harper ventured downstairs. The store held a handful of customers, locals who nodded at Luther and eyed Harper with the reserved curiosity of small towns, where strangers remain strangers until proven otherwise. She waited until the last customer left before approaching the counter. "I need to find work. Are there any businesses hiring?" Luther's expression suggested he already knew what she'd discover, but wanted her to learn it firsthand. "You could try the diner, the grocery, hardware store. Medical clinic sometimes needs people. Library takes volunteers." She spent the afternoon walking Millbrook's Main Street, entering every business with a practiced smile and a resume she'd printed at the library in Wyoming before they'd left. The pattern established itself quickly. Initial interest, questions about experience, and then the inevitable inquiry, where would she be living? When she mentioned the Blackwell property, faces changed. Polite rejections followed. The position had just been filled. They'd keep her resume on file. They'd call if anything opened up. At the medical clinic, a small practice run by a doctor nearing retirement and a nurse practitioner who handled most of the daily work, Harper offered her RN license as evidence of qualification. The nurse practitioner, a woman named Angela Torres, actually seemed interested until Harper mentioned inheriting her grandfather's land. Angela's warmth evaporated. "I'm sorry, we're not hiring right now. Your sign out front says you're looking for a registered nurse." "That's outdated. We filled the position last week." The lie was obvious, but Harper lacked the leverage to challenge it. She thanked Angela and left, adding the clinic to the list of places that would rather leave positions empty than hire someone connected to Nate Blackwell. By evening, she'd exhausted every possibility in Millbrook. The kids helped Luther organize inventory in exchange for sandwiches he made from the deli counter, refusing payment with the excuse that the meat was approaching its sell-by date anyway. Harper ate mechanically, too frustrated to taste food, trying to calculate how she'd manage when nobody would employ her. Reed spread his notebook across the table, pages covered in copied symbols from the Barnes Foundation. "I've been analyzing the pattern. It's not decorative, it's instructional. See how the symbols spiral inward toward the northeast corner? That corner is significant." Garrett leaned over his shoulder. "Maybe there's something buried there, like treasure." "Statistically improbable. More likely the symbols indicate a reference point or marker for something else." Willa drew her own interpretation of the symbols, artistic rather than analytical. Her version transformed them into flowers and vines, beauty extracted from mystery. Colton had been reading more of the journal, the parts Harper had skimmed over because the technical language made her head hurt. His voice cut through the dinner conversation. "Mom, listen to this. It's from August 12th. Today I understood what greed does to decent men. W.H. showed his true nature. I see now why this valley has remained pristine, not because it lacks value, but because exposing that value would destroy it." "What does that mean?" Harper took the journal and read the entry in full. Her grandfather's handwriting grew more agitated on this page, the careful engineering script deteriorating into something urgent. He'd found something valuable enough to destroy the valley. Someone named W.H. had revealed their true nature. 2 days later came the threat against Adelaide and Vivian. "I think it means your great-grandfather found something worth a lot of money, and someone wanted him to lie about it so they could steal it later." "Did he lie?" "I don't know, maybe. Or maybe he told the truth to the wrong people, and that's why he had to hide out here." Luther had been listening from the kitchen. He approached the table, his expression thoughtful. "Harper, there's something you should know about Apex Resource Development, the company that kept trying to buy Nate's land." She closed the journal and gave him her full attention. "They're not just any mining company. They're big. Corporate headquarters in Billings, operations across 3 states. Started in the 70s as Titan Industries, got absorbed by Western Mining in the 80s, then restructured as Apex in the 90s. The CEO is a man named Warren Holloway, been running things for 40 years, maybe longer." The initials clicked. W.H. Warren Holloway. Could be. Nate never mentioned names, at least not to me. But I remember when Apex made that last offer, 7 months before he died. Their attorney came personally. Fancy car, expensive suit. Made it clear this was Holloway's final offer. When Nate refused, the attorney said something about time being on their side, about eventually getting what they wanted one way or another. Luther, why would they offer $210,000 for land the county values at $32,000? That's the question, isn't it? Either they know something the county doesn't, or they're idiots with too much money. And Warren Holloway didn't build a mining empire by being an idiot. Harper's phone buzzed, battery down to 11%. A text from an unknown number. Ms. Winters, this is Preston. Have you reconsidered my offer? Time is running out. Let me help you before this gets worse. She deleted it without responding. Preston's help came with strings attached to chains wrapped around anchors. Whatever her grandfather had protected for 46 years, she owed it to him to at least understand what it was before she surrendered. That night, after the kids fell asleep in beds with actual mattresses, Harper sat at the window overlooking Millbrook's empty street and tried to organize information into something coherent. Her grandfather had been a geologist. He'd found rare earth elements in concentrations he described as unprecedented. Someone had threatened his family. He'd bought the land and spent 46 years protecting it from a mining company that still wanted it badly enough to offer 7 times the assessed value. The pieces suggested a puzzle, but she couldn't see the picture. She needed expertise she didn't possess, knowledge she couldn't access with 11% battery and no money to pay for internet access. Morning brought Luther with news. There's a woman in Chester, about 38 miles from here, runs a bar and grill called Rosie's Roadhouse. She mentioned last time I was there that she's looking for evening help. Might be worth the drive. 38 miles each way meant 76 miles daily, gas money that would consume whatever she earned. But it was income, potential anyway, and Harper had learned to pursue potential because waiting for certainty meant starving. She left the kids with Luther, who'd agreed to watch them in exchange for their continued help in the store, and drove the Explorer toward Chester with the fuel gauge already warning her about consequences. Rosie's Roadhouse occupied the kind of building that had been repurposed so many times its original function was lost to history. The interior mixed bar and restaurant, booths along the windows, tables in the center, a long bar backed by shelves of bottles that caught the afternoon light. The woman behind the bar, Rosie presumably, was 60-something with the weathered competence of someone who'd been serving drinks and taking orders since before Harper was born. Harper introduced herself and explained she was looking for work. Rosie looked her up and down with an assessment that felt more thorough than kind. Experience? 3 years waiting tables in Cheyenne, short order cook in Laramie before that. I'm reliable and I need the work. Everyone needs work. Why should I hire you? Because I'll show up on time, do the job right, and I don't complain. I've got 4 kids depending on me, and I don't have the luxury of calling in sick or showing up hungover or causing drama. You'll get your money's worth. Rosie pulled a rag from under the bar and wiped down the already clean surface. Evening shift, 4 to midnight, 4 days a week. $12 an hour plus tips. Tips are decent if you're fast and friendly. Start tomorrow. Relief nearly buckled Harper's knees. Thank you. I won't disappoint you. Everyone disappoints eventually, but let's see how long you last. She drove back to Millbrook with the fuel gauge deep into the red zone, coasting downhill and praying to gods of mechanical mercy. The Explorer made it, barely, coughing into Luther's parking lot with what felt like vapor in the tank. The math offered slim hope, but it was progress toward impossible, rather than standing still staring at it. The kids were organizing canned goods when she returned, Reed maintaining a detailed spreadsheet on Luther's computer, while Garrett and Colton counted items, and Willa created labels with artistic flourishes. They'd adapted to their circumstances with the resilience children developed when circumstances changed too frequently to resist. That evening, Harper sat with the journal again, working through pages by the light from Luther's desk lamp. The technical notations began to make sense through repetition and context. Her grandfather had taken core samples across the 40 acres, drilling down through soil and rock to extract cylinders of geological history. Each sample had been analyzed for mineral content, the results recorded in parts per million. The rare earth elements appeared consistently across all samples. Neodymium at concentrations between 1,400 and 2,300 parts per million. Dysprosium between 450 and 870. Other elements she'd never heard of, terbium, europium, yttrium, all present in quantities her grandfather's notes described as exceptional. One entry stood out. August 13, 1978. If these results hold, we're looking at one of the richest rare earth deposits in North America. Conservative value estimate 15 to 20 million at current market prices. But WH sees only profit without consequences. He's proposed we falsify the reports, claim the site is barren, then purchase the land privately through shell companies. Wait 5 years for the Titan contract to expire, then discover the deposit ourselves and sell the rights for personal fortune. I told him no. He showed me photographs of Adelaide at the grocery store, Vivian in her stroller, addresses visible in the background. The threat was clear. Harper read it 3 times, each pass revealing new horror. Warren Holloway, if WH was indeed Holloway, had proposed fraud and followed it with threats against a 6-month-old baby. Her mother. Her. The next entry was dated August 15th. I've decided I will submit the false report as WH demands, but I will not let this discovery enrich men who threaten my family. I've contacted a realtor about purchasing the land myself. Every dollar I have will go toward protecting what lies beneath this ground from people who would tear it apart without conscience. Adelaide doesn't understand why I'm doing this. I can't explain because explaining means telling her about the threats, and telling her means she'll live in fear. Better she thinks I've lost my mind than know the danger. The entries continued sporadically after that. Documentation of his barn construction, notes about living alone, observations about the valley's ecology, and recurring references to waiting, to standing guard, to hoping that someday the technology would exist to extract rare earth elements without environmental devastation, or that legal protections would prevent corporations from destroying land for profit. Her grandfather had sacrificed his marriage, his relationship with his daughter, 46 years of normal life, all to keep this land out of Warren Holloway's hands. And now, Holloway was still trying to acquire it, still circling like a predator who'd waited decades for his prey to die. Harper's shift at Rosie's started the next afternoon. The drive consumed a quarter tank, gas that cost money she'd earn back in tips if the customers were generous. The work was familiar, taking orders, delivering food, refilling drinks, managing the careful dance of remembering who ordered what and getting it to them while it was still hot. Her feet ached within 2 hours, back protesting the constant movement, but she'd work through worse. The tips accumulated slowly, singles and fives, occasional tens from tables who'd had good days or good drinks. By the time her shift ended, she'd earned $73 in tips on top of the $96 in wages. Money that felt like oxygen after suffocating, even knowing most of it would go to gas for the next shift. She made it home by 1:30 a.m., exhausted but employed. Luther had left a note on the stairs. Kids are asleep, leftovers in the fridge if you're hungry. Harper ate, standing at the counter, too tired to sit, then climbed to the room where her children slept in beds someone else was providing, and tried not to think about how many shifts would be required before they could stop depending on Luther's kindness. The pattern repeated through the following days. Morning with the kids, helping read with the foundation symbols that obsessed him, reading the journal with Garrett, drawing with Willa, listening to Colton's theories about treasure and mystery. Afternoon drive to Chester, evening shift at Rosie's, late night return, Sleep compressed into 5-hour blocks that left her functioning, but hollow. After her third shift, Rosie pulled her aside. "You're good at this. Why are you living out here instead of someplace with better opportunities?" Long story. Short version is, I inherited property in Millbrook, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with it. Rosie's expression shifted. "What property?" "My grandfather's place, 40 acres with a barn, about 12 miles outside town." The temperature in Rosie's demeanor dropped 10 degrees. "Nate Blackwell's place." "You knew him?" "Knew of him. Everyone around here knows about Nate Blackwell's land. That property's got a reputation." "What kind of reputation?" "The kind that means smart people stay away from it. Look, you're a good worker, and I don't want to lose you. But if I were you, I'd sell that land fast and move on. Nothing good comes from holding on to what Nate Blackwell protected." Harper wanted to press for details, but Rosie turned away. Conversation closed. The warning joined the growing collection of unexplained fears surrounding the property. People were afraid but wouldn't say why. The land was supposedly worthless, but Apex had offered a fortune. Her grandfather had guarded it for 46 years, but couldn't or wouldn't explain what he was protecting. On her day off, Harper drove back to the barn with the kids. They'd made the trip enough times that the ruts felt familiar, the explorer's complaints routine. Willa's fever hadn't returned, and her energy had improved. Immune system winning the battle without antibiotics Harper still couldn't afford. Small victories accumulated into survival. Reed led them immediately to the foundation, his notebook filled with observations and theories. He'd been studying the symbols every chance he got, copying them in different configurations, looking for patterns that might reveal meaning. His dedication had infected the others. Garrett and Colton now competed to find new details they'd missed before. Willa sketched variations in her notebook, artistic interpretations that sometimes revealed connections Reed's analytical mind had overlooked. "The spiral tightens here." Reed traced the pattern with his finger. 14 complete rotations around the perimeter, each one slightly smaller, all converging at this corner, the northeast corner. "It's mathematically precise." Garrett knelt beside a section of stones. "These ones are different. Look, the color's not quite the same as the others." He was right. The stones at the corner, roughly 3.5 feet wide and 4 feet high, were granite like the rest but with a subtle variation in tone. Lighter maybe, or just different enough that once you noticed you couldn't stop seeing it. Colton pressed his palm against the surface. "They feel different too, smoother, like someone touched them more." Harper examined the section herself. The stones did feel smoother, worn in a way the surrounding foundation wasn't. And now that she looked closely, she could see the mortar in the gaps was different. Newer, perhaps, or at least not as weathered. Reed opened his journal to a page covered in sketches. "I've been reading more of Great-Grandpa Nate's notes. There's a passage from October 1978 that says, 'Follow the serpent's coil to the hidden heart.' I think the spiral is the serpent. In this corner is the heart. So there's something here, hidden?" Hypothesis. The symbols form a sequence that, when activated correctly, operates a mechanism. Like a combination lock but using position and pattern instead of numbers. Garrett's eyes lit up. "We should try it. Press them in order." Harper's instinct was to refuse, to protect them from disappointment or danger, or whatever unknown thing might result. But they were already pressing stones experimentally, testing which ones moved and which were solid. And she found herself hoping they'd discover something, anything, that would justify her grandfather's sacrifice and explain why this land had consumed his life. Reed directed the operation with scientific precision. The 6 unique symbols repeated in sequence around the foundation: circle, branch, angle, curve, branch, circle, each one distinct in design. He'd mapped them all, numbered them, created a grid showing their positions. "We need to press them sequentially, following the spiral inward, one at a time, 2-second intervals. Starting here." Garrett pressed the first symbol, a circle at the outermost point of the spiral on the west wall. Nothing happened. Colton pressed the second, a branching pattern 3 feet away. Still nothing. They continued around the foundation, following Reed's map, pressing each symbol in sequence as the spiral tightened toward the northeast corner. Willa pressed the 23rd symbol. Reed pressed the 24th. The pattern brought them to the final 6 symbols, clustered tight around the corner section where the stones were different. Garrett pressed the first of these, his palm flat against the worn granite. A sound emerged from deep within the foundation, stone grinding against stone, mechanical and deliberate. They all froze. Harper stepped forward. "Stop! We don't know what—" Colton pressed the second symbol before she could finish. The grinding continued, louder now. A click echoed from somewhere behind the stones. Reed pressed the third symbol, then the fourth, clinical precision overriding caution. The grinding intensified. Dust fell from between the stones. Willa reached for the 5th symbol, hesitated, looked at Harper for permission or warning. Harper nodded because stopping now seemed pointless and maybe dangerous. Mechanical systems half engaged could be worse than systems completed. Willa pressed. Reed pressed the 6th and final symbol. The grinding reached a crescendo, then stopped. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the entire section of different colored stones, roughly 12 square feet of granite, shifted inward 2 inches. Gaps opened around the edges, revealing darkness beyond and the reality that this corner wasn't foundation at all. It was a door. They stood staring at what they'd uncovered, the implications spreading like cracks through ice. Someone had built a hidden entrance into the foundation, had carved symbols into granite to mark the combination, had designed a mechanism that still functioned after 47 years. Garrett found his voice first. "Holy crap." Reed was already pulling on the stones, fingers working into the gaps. "Help me. We need to open it fully." Harper should have stopped them, should have called someone, gotten adult supervision, taken precautions. But she was pulling too, prying at the stones until they shifted enough to reveal the full opening. 3 feet wide, 4 feet tall, steps leading down into darkness. Colton's face glowed with vindication. "I told you! Treasure! There's actual treasure!" "We don't know that. It could be anything. Storage, maybe. Or just empty space." But even as Harper said it, she knew. Her grandfather hadn't built an elaborate hidden entrance for storage. Whatever was down there mattered enough that he'd spent 46 years protecting it. Reed was already descending the stairs, using his phone for light. Harper grabbed his shoulder. "Wait, we need flashlights, real light, and we all go together." They retrieved the LED lantern from the Explorer, plus Harper's phone, though its battery was down to 38%. The descent required them to go single file, Harper in front, kids behind her in birth order, because instinct said protect the youngest, even though danger didn't respect age. 26 steps, each one carved from bedrock, leading down into cold that made their breath visible. The chamber at the bottom stole Harper's ability to process information for several seconds. Her brain registered details without assembling them into coherence. 18 feet by 20, carved entirely from granite, ceiling 8 feet high, temperature at least 20 degrees cooler than outside. Filing cabinets against the walls, shelves holding plastic containers, equipment under tarps, maps in tubes, notebooks in stacks, everything organized with precision that spoke to obsession or dedication or fear of forgetting. Garrett's whisper echoed off stone. "What is this place?" Harper approached the nearest filing cabinet slowly, half expecting it to vanish if she moved too fast. The drawer pulled open smoothly despite decades underground. Inside were hanging folders, each one labeled with dates and technical terms. She scanned labels until 2 caught her attention. Official reports, 1978, and actual findings, confidential. Her hands shook as she pulled both folders. The forms looked nearly identical. Geological survey templates, professional formatting. But the numbers told completely different stories. The official version claimed concentrations below commercial viability. The confidential version showed extraordinary concentrations, estimates worth millions, even in 1978 dollars. And at the bottom of the confidential report, her grandfather's handwritten note: "The deposit beneath this property represents one of the richest concentrations of strategic minerals in North America, but recommending development would destroy the land and enrich men whose greed I have witnessed firsthand." Reed examined the plastic containers on shelves, each labeled with GPS coordinates. Colton found equipment under tarps: theodolite, microscope, portable spectrometer. Willa discovered notebooks spanning decades, and Garrett found the photograph taped inside a cabinet labeled Evidence Archive. 4 men at a survey site, mountains behind them, equipment visible. Harper recognized her grandfather immediately, younger but with the same serious expression. The other 3 were strangers until she turned the photograph over and read the identifications in Nate's handwriting. Paul Henderson, deceased, 1979. Graham Sutherland, Titan Industries, retired. Warren Holloway, Titan supervisor. Below that, August 14th, 1978. The day I learned what greed does to decent men. The day I chose silence over blood money. WH threatened Adelaide and Vivian. "I submit false data tomorrow to save them, but I will ensure WH never profits from this." Harper slid down the wall until she sat on the cold stone floor, photograph in her shaking hands. Her grandfather had documented everything, had preserved the evidence of his fraud and Holloway's threats, had built a chamber that could survive decades, waiting for someone to find it and understand what he'd done and why. The kids clustered around her, sensing the weight of what they'd discovered. Reed took the photograph gently, studying the faces. Garrett pulled more documents from the evidence archive: letters, newspaper clippings, legal papers. Colton found a USB drive labeled 2020 to 2023 updates, proof that Nate had maintained this archive until shortly before his death. They sat together in the hidden chamber while the lantern cast shadows, and Harper tried to organize thoughts that refused to organize. Her grandfather had found something worth millions. Warren Holloway had known about it, had threatened Nate's family to cover it up, had spent 47 years trying to acquire this land. Harper pulled her children close, 4 warm bodies in a cold chamber, and wondered what her grandfather would tell her if he were here. Whether he'd say she was right to keep fighting or foolish to risk her children's safety for land and legacy and secrets she was only beginning to understand. The answer would have to wait. Right now they needed to get back to Luther's before anyone noticed they'd been gone too long, before questions arose about where they'd been and what they'd found. Because Harper understood with sudden clarity that Warren Holloway was still hunting this land, still waiting, and the moment he knew she'd found her grandfather's archive, everything would change. They climbed back up the stairs, Harper directing everyone to move carefully, to disturb nothing that might signal their discovery to watching eyes. At the top, she showed the kids how to close the stone door, pressing the symbols in reverse order until the mechanism ground back into place and the entrance vanished behind granite that looked like it had never moved. On the drive back to town, Harper made them promise not to mention the chamber to anyone. Not Luther, not Preston, not kids they might meet at the store. This was family secret until she figured out what to do with it. The kids nodded solemnly, understanding that they'd found something dangerous disguised as treasure. That night at Rosie's, Harper worked her shift on autopilot, body present while her mind remained underground, cataloging filing cabinets. Rosie noticed her distraction and commented, but Harper blamed exhaustion, and Rosie accepted the lie because exhaustion was the default state of single mothers working evening shifts. The tips were good, $89 plus wages. Money she needed, but that felt absurd, measured against what lay hidden under her grandfather's barn. When her shift ended, she sat in the Explorer in Rosie's parking lot and called the only person she could think of who might have answers. The library in Billings would have internet. Universities had geology departments. Surely someone existed who could explain what she'd found and what she should do with it. Her phone's battery hit 8% before she abandoned the search. She'd need to find expertise, real expertise, someone who understood rare earth deposits and mineral rights and how to protect discoveries from corporations that had spent decades hunting them. But first she needed to survive until she could find that help. Needed to keep working at Rosie's and keeping her children fed and hoping nobody noticed that she'd found what Warren Holloway had been seeking for 47 years. The drive back to Millbrook stretched longer than usual, exhaustion and revelation combining into a weight that pressed her toward the road's edge. She made it to Luther's parking lot on fumes and willpower, stumbled up the stairs to the room where her children slept, and collapsed into bed with a photograph from the evidence archive still in her jacket pocket. Tomorrow she'd figure out what to do. Tonight she'd sleep and dream of her grandfather standing guard alone for 46 years, waiting for someone to understand that some things mattered more than money. That integrity had a price, and he'd been willing to pay it. Harper just hoped she was strong enough to pay it too. The email to 14 geology professors went out at midnight from the public library's computer, Harper having driven there after her shift ended because desperation made better decisions than sleep. She kept the message vague. 1978 geological survey data requiring authentication, possible rare earth deposits requesting professional consultation, and attached photographs of her grandfather's dual reports taken with her phone's dying battery. 13 addresses bounced or auto-replied with out-of-office messages. One went through to Montana State University, vanishing into whatever void consumed emails sent by desperate strangers who couldn't afford to sound desperate. She drove back to Luther's with the fuel gauge screaming and her mind circling the same calculations. 80 days remaining before the county could move on the property. $384 per week from Rosie's minus gas meant maybe $250 in actual income. The math offered no path forward, only the grinding certainty that working herself into exhaustion still wouldn't be enough. The response came at 5:23 the next morning, waking Harper from dreams of chambers that went down forever. The phone's buzz pulled her from sleep into confusion until she saw the notification. Urgent, 1978, survey authentication. The email was brief and urgent. If these numbers are authentic, this represents one of highest-grade REE deposits documented in Western Hemisphere. Neodymium and dysprosium concentrations exceed best Chinese deposits. National security implications. Call me immediately. This is not academic curiosity. Dr. Elise Donovan, followed by a phone number. Harper used the last $18 on her phone card to make the call, standing in Luther's parking lot while dawn painted the mountains. The voice that answered was female, rapid fire, professional urgency barely contained by academic credentials. Where did you get this data? Harper explained about the inheritance, the barn, the hidden chamber, left out the eviction and the desperation because those felt like admissions of weakness. Who else knows? Just me and my children, and one friend who knows about the property but not about what we found. A pause, the sound of papers rustling or keyboards clicking. Ms. Winters, if these numbers are accurate, you're sitting on a deposit worth between $250 and $400 million at current market prices. Conservative estimate. And someone very dangerous has been trying to acquire it for decades. I need to verify the source material immediately. I'm driving there today. Alone. Tell no one I'm coming. Why the secrecy? Because rare earth elements are strategic materials critical for national defense. Because whoever wanted your grandfather's data buried has had 47 years to position themselves. Because you're about to be the center of something that will destroy you if you're not careful. I'll be there by 3 p.m. The line went dead. Harper stood in the parking lot holding a phone that had delivered both hope and terror in equal measure. The number Dr. Donovan mentioned meant nothing and everything simultaneously. She couldn't conceptualize that wealth, couldn't translate it into anything that felt real. But the danger part she understood perfectly. Dr. Donovan arrived at 247 in an unmarked white sedan with rental plates and no university identification visible. She looked younger than her voice suggested, maybe late 40s, dressed in field gear that had seen actual field work. Two heavy equipment cases emerged from her trunk, professional instruments that probably cost more than the Explorer. Harper led her to the barn, the kids left behind with Luther, and strict instructions to say nothing about chambers or discoveries. Donovan worked in focused silence once they reached the hidden entrance, descending into the chamber with the intensity of someone who'd built a career on evidence that couldn't lie. She opened sealed containers Nate had preserved, ran tests using equipment Harper couldn't identify, cross-referenced notes and samples and calculations, while muttering technical terms that might as well have been foreign languages. 3 hours passed. Donovan photographed everything systematically, documenting the chamber like a crime scene where the crime was still in progress. When she finally sat back against the stone wall, her hands trembled slightly as she removed safety gloves. Your grandfather's data is accurate. Conservative, actually. I'm testing concentrations 15 to 20% higher than his 1978 reports. Harper's chest constricted. What does that mean in practical terms? It means this is world-class. Top 5 globally. It means this deposit could reduce U.S. dependence on Chinese rare earth imports by 14%. It means you're sitting on something that matters not just economically, but strategically for national security. And it means someone will try to take it from me. Donovan pulled out a laptop, opened files that showed corporate structures and acquisition histories. I researched Apex Resource Development during the drive here. Warren Holloway wasn't just a Titan Industries employee in 1978, he was vice president of operations. When Titan was absorbed by Western Mining Consolidated in 1986, Holloway engineered the merger. When Western was absorbed by Apex in 1995, Holloway positioned himself as CEO. He spent 40 years consolidating power and acquiring every asset Titan ever touched, including their geological surveys. Exactly, which means he's had access to your grandfather's official reports, the falsified ones, for decades. He knows this land exists. He knows Nate surveyed it. He's been waiting for your grandfather to die so he could finally claim what Nate buried. Harper pulled the photograph from her jacket, the one showing 4 men at a survey site. He was there when my grandfather made the discovery. He threatened my grandmother and my infant mother to force the false reports. He's been hunting this land for 47 years. Donovan studied the photo with professional assessment that couldn't quite hide personal rage. Then we have evidence of fraud spanning 5 decades. Corporate conspiracy. Environmental crimes if we can prove Apex used the false surveys to obtain permits. This isn't just about your property, Harper. This is potentially a RICO case. I don't care about cases. I care about keeping my children safe and somehow holding on to land everyone wants to steal. That's the point. Your vulnerability is time. Holloway knows that. He'll wait until circumstances force your hand, then acquire the property through perfectly legal means. By the time anyone investigates, he'll own the mineral rights, and your grandfather's fraud becomes irrelevant because the statute of limitations protects him. The walls of the chamber felt like they were closing in. Harper had thought finding the archive would give her leverage, but leverage required knowledge she didn't possess and resources she couldn't access. Holloway had infinite patience and corporate lawyers and the ability to simply wait while she drowned in debt. Donovan's voice cut through the despair. We need 2 parallel strategies. First, file a mineral rights claim with the Bureau of Land Management immediately. Establishes your legal standing, makes you the documented discoverer. Second, we expose Holloway's fraud to federal authorities, FBI, EPA, Department of Interior. Create a situation where he can't simply buy the land because federal investigation freezes everything pending review. How long does federal investigation take? 18 to 24 months minimum. I don't have that kind of time, which is why we file the BLM claim Monday morning. The moment it's public record, the moment federal agencies are involved, county can't auction the property, not during active investigation. It sounded reasonable until Harper considered the implications. Making the claim public meant Holloway would know within hours. Federal agencies might protect the land, but they wouldn't protect her children from a man who'd threatened a 6-month-old baby to cover his crimes. I need to think about this. Need to make sure my kids are safe before I start a war with a mining executive who's been planning this for 47 years. Donovan nodded slowly. Understandable. But Harper, the clock is already running. Every day you wait is another day Holloway consolidates his position. They climbed back up the stone stairs, sealed the chamber, and returned to town in separate vehicles like they'd never met. Donovan handed Harper a card with contact information and a flash drive containing copies of everything she'd documented. Call me when you're ready, or when Holloway makes his move, whichever comes first. That night, Harper's shift at Rosie's dragged into eternity, her mind underground cataloging filing cabinets, while her body delivered burgers and refilled drinks. The tips were decent, $73, but every dollar felt like mockery measured against the wealth locked in granite under her grandfather's barn. Preston's text arrived during her break. Stop playing detective with property you can't afford to keep. Sign it over before you lose everything and owe legal fees. Last offer. She deleted it without responding, but the message confirmed what she'd suspected. Small towns had long ears, and people talked. Someone had noticed her internet searches, her questions, her sudden interest in geological surveys. Information was traveling, and eventually it would reach Holloway, if it hadn't already. 5 days after Donovan's visit, the black Cadillac Escalade appeared at Luther's store. Harper was upstairs helping the kids with homework when she heard the engine, looked out the window, and felt her stomach drop. The vehicle announced wealth and authority, contrasting sharply with Millbrook's working-class trucks and Luther's ancient Ford. The man who entered wore a wool coat that probably cost more than Harper had earned in 6 months. Silver hair perfectly styled, expensive boots, practiced warmth that didn't quite reach his eyes. He approached Luther at the counter with the confidence of someone accustomed to deference. "I'm looking for Harper Winters. I understand she's staying here." Luther's expression remained neutral, but his posture shifted slightly. A subtle, defensive stance Harper recognized from her years working bars where fights began with polite questions. "Might I ask, who's looking for her?" "Warren Holloway, CEO of Apex Resource Development. I knew her grandfather." Harper emerged from the stairwell, heart hammering, but face controlled through years of practice hiding fear from people who fed on it. "I'm Harper Winters." Holloway's assessment was quick and thorough, categorizing her in seconds as someone whose cooperation could be purchased, because poverty made everyone purchasable eventually. His smile suggested sympathy and business sense in equal measure. "Ms. Winters, I'm sorry for your loss. Nate was a brilliant man. Difficult, but brilliant. I wanted to speak with you about the property you've inherited. Perhaps we could talk privately? Anything you need to say can be said here." He gestured toward the door. "I have an offer that I think will interest you. Your children are upstairs, correct? They shouldn't have to hear their mother discussing financial difficulties." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. He knew where her children were, knew she had financial difficulties, knew everything that mattered about her vulnerability. Harper followed him outside into afternoon sun that felt too bright, too exposing. Holloway leaned against his Escalade like he owned the parking lot and everything in it. "I'll be direct because I respect your intelligence and your time. That property you've inherited, the barn, the 40 acres, it's a liability. The structure is condemned. You're working evening shifts 38 miles from here for wages that won't cover what you owe. You've been researching me. I make it my business to understand situations before making offers. And I have an offer, Miss Winters. $125,000. Cash. Immediate wire transfer to any account you specify. The number hung between them, simultaneously enormous and insulting. Enough to solve her immediate crisis. Nowhere near what the land was worth if Donovan's assessment was accurate. That's generous, but I need time to consider it. Holloway's warmth cooled by degrees. Time is what you don't have. County procedures are expensive, leave you liable for legal fees even after you lose the property. Fighting them requires attorneys you can't afford. And Ms. Winters, that land has no utilities, no road access, no economic value to anyone except as a development opportunity. Then why offer $125,000 for land the county values at $32,000? Because I knew your grandfather. Because I feel some responsibility to ensure his granddaughter isn't destroyed by his stubbornness. Because Apex can absorb the costs of demolition and environmental remediation that would bankrupt you. Every word was calculated, each sentence designed to sound reasonable while concealing the desperation underneath. Holloway needed this land badly enough to drive here personally, badly enough to research her circumstances, badly enough to offer nearly 4 times the assessed value while calling it charity. I appreciate the offer. I need a few days to think it over. His expression shifted, warmth evaporating completely. Don't wait too long, Miss Winters. And I should mention, he paused, letting the threat crystallize, that you have 4 dependent children. Social services monitors mothers who cannot provide stable housing or consistent income. Court dates are difficult to attend without employment. Legal proceedings are expensive when you're already in debt. The words landed like physical blows, each one precisely aimed at the fears that woke Harper at 3 a.m. in cold sweats. He was offering money with one hand while threatening her children with the other. The same pattern he'd used against her grandfather, except now the threats were legal rather than physical, systemic rather than personal. Thank you for the information, Mr. Holloway. I'll consider everything you've said. She turned toward the store before he could respond, walked inside with controlled calm, climbed the stairs to the room where her children studied, and locked the door behind her. Only then did she allow herself to shake, hands trembling with rage and terror, and the understanding that Warren Holloway had just declared war using weapons she didn't possess. Luther knocked 20 minutes later, his face grave. You okay up here? He threatened my kids, not directly, but clear enough. Holloway's been doing this for 40 years. He knows every legal pressure point, every system that can be weaponized against people who don't have resources. Nate held out because he had nothing to lose. You've got everything to lose. Harper pulled the photograph from the evidence archive out of her jacket, showed Luther the 4 men at the survey site. He was there in 1978 when my grandfather made the discovery. He threatened my grandmother and infant mother to force false reports. He's been hunting this land for 47 years, and he's not going to stop now. Luther studied the photo with recognition. That's Holloway, all right. Younger, but same eyes. Same smile that doesn't mean anything good. He looked up at Harper. What are you going to do? I don't know, but I need to make sure my kids are protected before I make any moves. Because once I file that BLM claim, once federal agencies get involved, everything escalates, and I can't risk him coming after them. That evening, Harper called Donovan from the library's computer room, where privacy and internet access intersected. The professor answered immediately, voice carrying urgency that didn't wait for pleasantries. Harper, I've been researching while waiting to hear from you. I need to tell you something about Apex Resource Development that changes everything. Harper listened while Donovan explained what she'd discovered. Apex had an operation 14.7 miles from the Blackwell property, listed officially as Montana Ridge Limestone Quarry. But satellite thermal imaging showed equipment signatures inconsistent with limestone processing. The thermal patterns matched rare earth element extraction, distinctive heat profiles that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. Cross-referencing Apex's financial records revealed $340 million in what they categorized as specialty industrial mineral sales over the past 17 years. Rare earth elements sold under vague classifications, while Apex maintained permits based on Nate's false 1978 survey claiming no REE deposits in the region. They've been illegally mining adjacent to your property for nearly 2 decades, Harper, using your grandfather's falsified data to claim the area is worthless while extracting hundreds of millions. This isn't just fraud, it's systematic criminal enterprise spanning 5 decades. Harper's mind raced through implications. Holloway hadn't just been waiting for Nate to die. He'd been mining all around the property, extracting wealth while positioning himself to eventually claim the centerpiece. And now, with Nate dead and Harper vulnerable, he was making his final move. What do I do? You let me contact someone who can help. I have a former PhD student who went into federal law enforcement, Special Agent Marlene Bradford, FBI White Collar Crime Division. If I can get her to review the evidence, she can open an investigation that freezes everything. How long does that take? If Bradford moves fast, she could be there within a week. But Harper, you need to understand what you're starting. Federal investigation means media attention, means pressure from people with infinite resources and no conscience, means years of your life consumed by something your grandfather spent 46 years trying to avoid. He avoided it because he was alone. I'm not alone. I have you. I have evidence. I have children who deserve better than watching their mother surrender to men who threaten babies to cover their crimes. Donovan's silence stretched long enough that Harper thought the connection had dropped. Then quiet and determined. Okay, I'll reach out to Bradford tonight. Be ready to move fast once this starts. And Harper, hide anything that matters. Documents, samples, anything they might try to destroy or steal. Because the moment Holloway knows federal agencies are involved, he'll do whatever it takes to eliminate evidence. They spent the next day preparing. Harper photographed every page in the evidence archive using the library scanner, creating digital backups she uploaded to email accounts under fake names. She selected the most critical soil samples and gave them to Luther for safekeeping in his nephew's safety deposit box 2 towns over. She made copies of the photographs showing Holloway at the survey site, distributed them to people who'd never met each other and had no connection to the property. Spreading the evidence meant Holloway couldn't destroy it all, even if he eliminated the original chamber. Insurance through redundancy, the only protection available to people without power. The kids knew something had changed, their mother's tension transmitting through small behaviors she couldn't entirely control. Reed asked directly during dinner at Luther's kitchen table, his analytical mind cutting through evasion. Is the man who came here the same man who threatened great-grandpa? Harper had resolved not to lie to them, not about things that affected their safety. Yes, Warren Holloway. He wants the land and he's willing to do dangerous things to get it. Garrett's jaw set with 9-year-old determination. Then we don't let him have it. It's not that simple, honey. He has power and money and lawyers. We have... She stopped, realizing what she'd been about to say. We have nothing. But that wasn't true anymore. They had evidence. They had Donovan. They had each other in the truth and a grandfather who'd proven that one person standing alone could hold back greed for 46 years. Willa's voice came soft, but certain. We have what's right. Great-grandpa protected the land because destroying it was wrong. We can keep doing what he did. The simplicity of it made Harper's chest ache. 8 years old, and Willa understood what took adults decades to learn. That some fights were worth fighting, not because you'd win, but because losing without fighting was worse. You're right. We keep doing what he did. Together. Donovan called at 11:37 p.m., waking Harper from dreams of chambers that extended forever into darkness. Bradford reviewed the evidence. She's coming. Tomorrow. Emergency basis. She's bringing a full team. FBI, EPA, Department of Interior. If they verify what we've documented, they'll open a federal investigation that freezes the property immediately. Harper sat up in bed, heart hammering. Tomorrow? That's too fast. I need time to... You don't have time. Holloway made contact with you 5 days ago. He's going to escalate. And Harper, Bradford said something else. She's been tracking Apex for 2 years on unrelated environmental violations. Your evidence gives her probable cause for search warrants she's been trying to get for months. This is bigger than your property. This is taking down a criminal enterprise that's been operating since the 1970s. What do I need to do? Be at the barn at noon tomorrow. Bring the physical evidence, journals, samples, anything that can be tested independently. Bradford will interview you formally, document chain of custody, verify authenticity. If everything checks out, she arrests Holloway within 48 hours. The line went dead. Harper sat in darkness trying to process the acceleration from desperate survival to federal investigation in less than a week. Everything was happening too fast, control slipping away from her and toward forces she didn't understand and couldn't direct. But stopping wasn't an option anymore. Holloway had threatened her children. He'd been mining illegally for 17 years. He'd waited 47 years to steal what her grandfather had died protecting. Some things mattered more than safety. Her grandfather had understood that. Now Harper did too. Morning brought preparation instead of her shift at Rosie's. She'd called in sick, first time since starting, knowing Rosie would likely fire her, but accepting the loss because federal investigators mattered more than $12 an hour. Luther agreed to watch the kids, his expression suggesting he understood the weight of what was happening without needing details. Harper drove to the barn alone, arriving early to unlock the chamber and verify everything remained undisturbed. The stone door opened smoothly, mechanism still functioning after being sealed for days. Nothing had been touched. She was verifying the evidence archive when she heard vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, more than Donovan and Bradford should require. Harper climbed back up the stairs and emerged from the barn to find 5 government sedans parked in formation, federal plates and official insignia that announced authority with bureaucratic certainty. The woman who exited the lead vehicle was African American, mid-50s, carrying herself with the controlled intensity of someone who'd built a career on being right about things others missed. She approached Harper with professional assessment that felt thorough but not unkind. Ms. Winters, I'm Special Agent Marlene Bradford, FBI Corporate Fraud Division. Dr. Donovan briefed me on your situation. I need to verify your grandfather's evidence and interview you about the property history. This is going to take several hours. Are you prepared for that? Harper nodded, too nervous to trust her voice. Bradford gestured and her team emerged. 4 additional FBI agents, 2 EPA investigators, 2 Department of Interior specialists. They carried equipment that looked expensive and purposeful. Instruments that would either validate her grandfather's claims or prove she'd misunderstood everything. She led them to the chamber, descended the stairs with Bradford directly behind her, and the team following. The space felt smaller with 10 people in it, more prosaic with professionals documenting everything systematically. But Bradford's expression when she saw the filing cabinets confirmed what Harper needed to know. This was real, significant, worth the federal government's attention. The interview lasted 3 hours, Bradford recording everything while 2 agents photographed the chamber and specialists tested samples using portable equipment. Harper explained the discovery timeline, the journal entries, the photographs showing Holloway at the survey site. She detailed his visits, his offers, his thinly veiled threats about social services and custody. Bradford listened without interrupting until Harper finished, then asked the question that mattered most. Ms. Winters, are you prepared for what happens next? Once we open this investigation, once we arrest Warren Holloway, your life becomes very public. Media attention, legal proceedings that will take years, pressure from people with resources you can't imagine. Your grandfather chose isolation to avoid that. You don't have that option because you have children. Are you certain this is what you want? Harper thought about Willa's fever she couldn't afford to treat, about sleeping in barns because motels required money, about working for wages that would never be enough while sitting on wealth she couldn't access, about her grandfather spending 46 years alone so that someday, maybe, someone would finish what he'd started. My grandfather stood guard for 46 years with nothing but his conviction that some things matter more than money. I've got evidence in allies and children who deserve to learn that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding something else matters more than your fear. So yes, I'm certain. Bradford allowed herself a small smile, the first emotion that had cracked her professional composure. Then let's take down Warren Holloway. The EPA specialist interrupted with urgent discovery. Satellite data showed thermal signatures at the Apex quarry consistent with rare earth processing for 17 years. Financial analysis revealed hundreds of millions in sales categorized as specialty minerals. Cross-referencing with permits showed all environmental assessments had been based on NATE's 1978 falsified survey. This is systematic fraud spanning 5 decades, environmental crimes, conspiracy to defraud the United States. We can get search warrants for Apex headquarters within hours. Bradford made the call from inside the chamber, speaking to someone with authority to move federal resources fast. Harper listened to one-sided conversation that ended with Bradford saying, "Execute tonight, all locations simultaneously, and monitor Holloway's communications. If he tries to destroy evidence or flee jurisdiction, I want to know immediately." She ended the call and looked at Harper with grim satisfaction. "We're moving. Search warrants approved for Apex facilities in Billings, Helena, and Boise. Arrest warrant for Warren Holloway. Asset freeze pending investigation. And Ms. Winters, your property situation is suspended indefinitely pending federal review. County can't proceed during active investigation." Relief flooded through Harper so intensely she had to sit on the cold stone floor. The deadline that had pressed on her for weeks, suddenly irrelevant. She wouldn't lose the property, wouldn't watch helplessly while Holloway bought it at auction. Federal power had intervened where individual struggle had been failing. But Bradford's next words reminded her that relief was temporary. "Holloway will know within hours that we've frozen his assets and executed search warrants. He's going to be desperate. Desperate men with resources do unpredictable things. I'm assigning protective surveillance to your children. 2 agents, rotating shifts, until Holloway is in custody. Don't argue, this isn't optional. Your grandfather protected you when you were an infant. Let us protect your children now." Harper wanted to argue anyway, wanted to insist she could keep them safe herself. But she'd learned enough about Warren Holloway to know Bradford was right. Desperate men who'd threatened babies 47 years ago wouldn't hesitate to threaten them now. And her children's safety mattered more than her pride. "Thank you. When do you arrest him?" "Tonight, 5:17 p.m., simultaneous with search warrant execution. Body cameras will record everything. And Harper? He's going to post bail tomorrow. Probably 10 million, which he can afford. So don't think this is over just because he's arrested. This is the beginning of a very long fight." "How long?" 18 months minimum until trial. 2 to 3 years if he delays through appeals. Maybe longer if he's got judges in his pocket, which someone operating this long probably does. Can you survive that long? Harper thought about her grandfather surviving 46 years alone. About working at Rosie's for wages that would never be enough. About the chamber full of evidence that proved Holloway had been stealing for decades. About her children learning that standing up to power was possible, even when power seemed infinite. I'll survive as long as it takes. Bradford nodded once. Professional respect for civilian courage she probably didn't see often enough. Then let's get to work. They spent the afternoon documenting everything systematically, creating chain of custody records that would hold up in federal court. Harper signed forms she didn't fully understand, gave sworn statements about discovery timeline, authorized access to her grandfather's archives for federal examination. The weight of bureaucracy was enormous but necessary, each form another layer of protection against Holloway's eventual legal challenges. At 4:30, Bradford sent Harper back to town with instructions to stay at Luther's store until receiving confirmation that Holloway was in custody. Two FBI agents followed in an unmarked sedan, protective surveillance that made Harper feel simultaneously safer and more trapped. She'd asked for federal help and received it, but help came with oversight that reduced her autonomy, even while increasing her security. The kids were upstairs doing homework when she arrived, oblivious to the federal resources now committed to their protection. Luther met her at the top of the stairs, his expression worried. "Everything okay? You look like you've been through something." FBI is arresting Warren Holloway tonight. They've frozen his assets, executed search warrants, opened a federal investigation into Apex Resource Development. In Luther, they confirmed what my grandfather found. Hundreds of millions, maybe more, all of it under land Holloway's been trying to steal for 47 years. Luther sat heavily on the stairs, age and shock making his movements slow. Nate protected all that by living alone in a barn for 46 years. And he never told anyone because telling anyone meant the wrong people might find out. He told me. Through the chamber, through the evidence, through everything he preserved. He waited 46 years to tell someone who'd understand that some things matter more than money. Who'd know that courage isn't the absence of fear? The words settled over them, truth that felt both enormous and simple. Harper's phone buzzed at 5:41 p.m. Text from Bradford. Holloway in custody. Search warrants executed. Recommend you and children remain under surveillance until he posts bail, and we assess his response. She showed Luther the message. He nodded slowly, understanding that everything had just changed in ways neither of them could fully predict. Warren Holloway had been arrested for crimes spanning 5 decades. Federal investigation was underway into systematic fraud. And Harper, who'd arrived in Millbrook 3 weeks ago with $51 and 4 hungry children, was now the center of something that would either destroy her or prove her grandfather had been right to believe that integrity mattered more than survival. That night, she gathered her children and told them what was happening, explained as best she could that the man who'd threatened their great-grandfather had been arrested, that federal agents would be protecting them, that everything was about to become very complicated and public and difficult. Garrett asked the question she'd been dreading. Are we going to be rich now? From the stuff great-grandpa found? Maybe eventually, but it'll take years to resolve. And even then, I'm not sure rich is the right word. Your great-grandfather found something valuable, yes, but he found something that matters more than its value. Proof that one person can stand against corruption if they're willing to pay the price. Reed closed his notebook, his analytical mind processing implications at speeds Harper couldn't match. So we're not doing this for money. We're doing it because it's right. Exactly, Willa smiled, the simple satisfaction of a child who understood moral clarity before the world taught her that clarity was complicated. Then great-grandpa would be proud of us. Harper pulled them close, 4 warm bodies that justified every risk she was taking, every fight she'd committed to fighting. Her grandfather had stood alone for 46 years protecting land from people who saw only profit. She'd stand with allies and children and federal resources, protecting his legacy and proving that integrity could survive even when surviving seemed impossible. Outside, 2 FBI agents sat in an unmarked sedan watching Luther's store. Warren Holloway was spending his first night in federal custody, probably already working on bail and lawyers, and strategies to destroy evidence before trial. And somewhere in Montana darkness, the barn her grandfather had built stood above a chamber holding proof that greed could be defeated by patience and courage, and one person's willingness to sacrifice everything for principle. Tomorrow would bring media attention and public scrutiny and pressure from resources Harper couldn't imagine. But tonight she'd sleep knowing her children were safe. Her grandfather's sacrifice had meaning, and courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was deciding that some things mattered more.